abortion, it often means feeling a compromised sense of autonomy. This feeds into a recent trend in psychology that has found that autonomy leads to happiness, which in result leads to a better outcomes of all aspects of a person's life. In fact, according to the Journal of Personal and Social Psychology, autonomy was the number one deciding factor in a person's overall sense of happiness and well-being. For this reason, it is imperative that the resolution be affirmed. Our third contention is based on the value of egalitarianism, and that by affirming the parents' right to genetically modify their children, we are advancing egalitarianism. Egalitarianism is defined as a belief in human equality, especially with respect to social, political, and economic affairs. Children who are born with learning disabilities caused by genetic disorders are often starting life with a couple steps behind their peers. By using genetic modification tools, we can help make sure that these children are given a more equal platform to stand on throughout life. Also, the medical care required for children who experience genetic disorders is often very expensive. So not only do these children start behind in a social aspect, their parents also have less money available due to their medical cost. And as a result, the children is also at an economic disadvantage. For this reason, it is imperative that the resolution be affirmed. Our fourth contention is based on the value of economic freedom. As was mentioned in our third contention, children who are born with genetic disorders often start behind in life regards to the economic freedom. It is estimated by the National Institute of Health that by switching from a primary reactive care model to a preventative care model, citizens could save an estimated $3.7 billion annually. By allowing for the genetic modification of children, a major step towards preventative model could be taken. Genetic modification would create even greater savings than just the $3.7 billion, though. By completely eliminating type 1 diabetes, an autoimmune disorder that results in the immune system attacking its own pancreatic cells, through genetic modifications, Americans could save close to $100 billion annually. These savings are astronomical and could provide a much greater degree of economic freedoms for the families of those affected by genetic disorders that could be fixed through genetic modification. That is why it is absolutely necessary for this resolution today to be affirmed. It is for these reasons that we must urge for a signing with the affirmative in this resolution.
The American essayist, lecturer, and philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, "To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment." In today's world, where it is already difficult enough to be oneself, there are powers at work trying to make it even more strenuous to find a sense of individuality. Genetic enhancement is the tool which those powers are planning on utilizing to accomplish this feat. This House negates the resolution. Parents should have the right to genetically enhance their children using nanotechnology. I'd like to start by revisiting a few of the key terms of the resolution, specifically genetic enhancement and right. The National Human Genome Research Institute defines genetic enhancement as the transfer of genetic material intended to modify non-pathological human traits. The term pathological obviously relates to pathology, which is defined by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary as the study of the essential nature of diseases, and especially of the structural and functional changes produced by them. Therefore, the idea of genetic enhancement is only concerned with altering traits within the human genome that are not related to disease, i.e. physical traits such as hair color, eye color, height, complexion, etc. Furthermore, this definition of genetic enhancement entirely negates any argument that parents should have the right to genetically enhance their children based on the idea that it could prevent potential diseases of the child. According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, the word right as an adjective means being in accordance with what is just, good, or proper. As a noun, it means something to which one has a just claim. As you will see, parents do not have any good or proper reasons to claim that they should have the right to genetically enhance their children. The procedure itself presents a world of potential dangers to both the child and the mother, and the societal changes would be devastating if parents were to receive this right. Once again, this House negates the resolution as it does not act in the best interest of the child. In fact, it represents significant risks, both physical and societal, to the child, the parents of the child, and the world. First of all, I'd like to talk about the dangers of genetic enhancement. The Council for Responsible Genetics states that germline alteration in animals has led to the offspring being born without defects, but being much more likely to experience tumor growth as adults. It is also important to note that with each passing generation, the risk for tumor development grows higher and higher for each child in the bloodline. This further shows that we, whether we are students, doctors, or biologists, are merely humans and cannot know the full extent to which genetic enhancement could harm or even eradicate the human race. If If we are just starting to see the negative effects 2 generations later, who knows what dangers could be waiting for us in 5 generations? It is a potential harm, admittedly, but is it really worth the risk? We have developed the idea of genetic enhancement to benefit the human race, but when it presents such real and lethal dangers to not only the quality of life for humans, but also the mere existence of humans, is it still worth it? Furthermore, certain genes undergo a process of imprinting during development in which the version of the gene inherited from either parent is blocked from contributing to the individual's biological constitution. Therefore, not only is the embryo or fetus and its progeny at risk from the procedure, but so is the pregnant female. If the genes are introduced in utero, such genes can also infect the woman's tissues, including her own germline, and entail other risks to herself, such as cancer. Clearly, she is not in a position to give informed consent on behalf of herself or the developing embryo for a procedure that has not yet been tested in humans. Furthermore, the acceptance of genetic enhancement would reintroduce class systems to today's society and severely strengthen them where they already exist. The MIT Technology Review states that one way genetic enhancement of children, often referred to as designer babies, would contribute to the inequalities of the class system is the cost associated with the procedure. This type of nanotech is expensive and thusly unavailable to the average populace. Basically, the only people who would be able to afford this service are the wealthy. This would also potentially lead to society further casting others as inferior. An argument often used in favor of genetic enhancement is that it could eradicate certain genetic disorders and diseases that are considered undesirable. However, this implies that those individuals who have such disabilities are somehow inferior or less desirable than those who don't. Additionally, Dr. Teresa Blankmeyer-Burke, a professor of philosophy at Gallaudet University, argues that gene editing could lead to the extinction of entire unique communities, such as the sign and deaf community. By eradicating certain undesirable traits, we could be destroying entire cultures and leaving the remaining members of those minorities further marginalized. Furthermore, pursuing genetic enhancement could also lead to the ostracization of those unlucky few for whom the enhancement does not work. Finally, the Harvard Kennedy School argues that the normalization of genetic enhancement could lead to skewed sex ratios and son preference expanding even further. Once again, this House negates the resolution parents should have the right to genetically enhance their children using nanotechnology. Not only could genetic enhancement lead to severe repercussions for the children whom it is used upon, but to society as a whole. The full realm of negative possibilities is extensive and unknown. Is this House really willing to risk further harming this world ravaged by societal inequalities and injustice just because we want to choose what eye color our children have?
That was 5 minutes. You guys have 2 minutes to crossfire.
You say that women can't consent to this because it hasn't been tested on humans, but then when would the testing happen?
It's hard to answer that question. When it presents such...
And antibiotics weren't tested on humans until they were, and saved many lives.
However, this operation represents a lot of risks that have been known to happen in many mammals, not just rodents or other test animals, and therefore it is highly likely that this procedure could not only harm the patients, but also anyone who comes into contact with the patients.
The research that we found has actually said it's been very effective at deleting the mutations.
In every piece of research we have seen, they talk about how even for the first child, it may be safe, but the second child, third child, 15th child, it doesn't matter. Those risks triple and they are harder to eliminate. There is no reason why parents should mutate their children and then condemn possibly further descendants into lives of even worse things than we are trying to eliminate through genetic enhancement.
So mutation will happen whether they genetically enhance them or not, because it's just something that happens
Yes,
every time.
However, with genetic enhancement, we could lead to the development of new diseases, such as antibiotics, like you mentioned. It may prevent some diseases, but it also led to the evolution of new diseases, which we may not be able to treat.
And that is possible, but we don't have the testing right now to know in the long run.
But is it worth it? Is it worth it when it not only presents such significant risks to not only the patient, but also everyone who comes into contact with them?
I mean, you could ask the 30,000 people suffering from Huntington's disease if it is.
Once again, genetic enhancement refers to non-pathological traits, no diseases.
I believe that is an incorrect definition. So.
It is from the National Human Genome Institute.
That's right. All right, so second speaker, you have 5 minutes.
So I would like to address several of the issues made by the first speaker of the negative. First, I would like to say that they have an incorrect definition of enhancement. Many of the definitions we found for enhancement do include pathological traits. Like with any word in the English vocabulary, there are disagreements on exactly what it means. So we ask that the judge take that into consideration when assessing these definitions. Something else we would say is they put this potential risk, this ferry of this risk out there. And I won't lie to you. There is a chance that there are things that could be wrong. However, when those mutations do happen for potential cancers, based on things like activating tyrosine kinase receptors, these types of things, it is possible then that these could actually be then removed by the geneticists who are doing this. So they can go in, if they make a mistake, they can fix the mistake later on. That is also a possibility. Also, it's not the parents who are doing this procedure in and of itself. It's done with medical doctors through consent. It happened in China recently. There were many medical doctors working on that scenario. It wasn't one person who went to the office and decided, today I want to have a genetically modified child. There was lots of research that was done into it, and they made sure that they could create it as safe as possible. And we're not arguing the legality of this either. We're arguing it from a moral perspective, a values-based perspective. As to their first contention that this could potentially cause cancer, there's a lot of research now into what exactly does cause cancer, and that's very undefinitive at this point. It is too early to know the exact side effects of these technologies, but that's why you do test it. If it weren't for Alexander Fleming testing penicillin, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people would have died. If it wasn't for testing the flu vaccine every year, hundreds of thousands or millions of people would have died. That's the only way to advance science, is to eventually get to the human test subject. So we're arguing about the right to it. At some point, they have to have the right to it. Do people deserve the right to antibiotics, other things that could potentially make their life better? The FDA has procedures for when things are so important, they get rushed through. It's called the rush-through process. And there are all kinds of cancer drugs and new treatments constantly coming out. And the FDA says, we don't have the exact testing for it yet. We don't know exactly how good it is yet, but we do know it helps people. And they say it is irresponsible to deny them that right if it can so help. So we think that parents should have this right to it. Also, as far as implantation, so the way this actual procedure works is that the woman is superovulated. She takes drugs for a couple weeks. The man sample is taken, they're paired, and then the most viable is taken to begin with of the embryos, and then one can be selected for and tested out for certain pathologies, such as Huntington's, which, like we said, it's this crippling disorder that kills tons of people, and they suffer, and it's very similar to ALS in its neurological effects, and we've seen how bad that is. As far as the actual implantation goes, they make sure it's as viable as possible. If they think there's a chance that the implantation could fail, it's off the table. And again, it is expensive. We do concede that to our opponents. However, as to our point of egalitarianism, we think this could actually increase the amount of egalitarianism. It would reduce those social barriers. We could create a more mobile society in that now because over time technology becomes more affordable. And if these families that are being held together by the shackles of crippling disorders and diseases of, you see families with Tay-Sachs and all these other disorders that over time, it just passes down and passes down. We can actually remove that. We can fix that. So these families aren't permanently marred. You're not starting behind in life anymore. You can actually have a chance to compete with your peers. And that's what America is about. That's what we are as a society. That we want everybody to have a fair chance. And we think that if we don't affirm this resolution, then we're taking a step back as a country. We're denying people their rights. And that's something that many people have fought for, is to have these rights. So we think it's an absolute necessity that this be affirmed. Thank you.
I would like to start by addressing your point that mutations happen naturally for a speaker. Yes, they do, but this does not mean that we should court potentially dangerous mutations. Mutations have been known to lead to cancer. That's what causes tumors, is the buildup of mutations that block cancer-preventing genes from doing what they're supposed to do. Additionally, when we start editing the human genome, we're cutting and pasting these genetics. We don't know what effects could lead from that. We just don't know. It could cause other more dangerous diseases. And you guys mentioned quality of life, that this would lead to increased quality of life for people with diseases. Perhaps, but you would be destroying communities in the process. These people with disabilities have built up strong communities, strong networks of people who understand what they're going through. And not only would you be destroying that community for perpetuity, you would be leaving those who are currently in that community without further networking opportunities. You'd be stranding them in a world that cannot understand what they are going through. As I mentioned before, deleting the repeats leads to other possible consequences, and like I said, could lead to even worse diseases. And it could even, what you propose could lead to further skewed sex ratios. People already choose to have boys over girls. This would lead to people being able to choose at the cellular level that their child is going to be a boy. And that is, at its heart, immoral. You conceded that the procedure is expensive, and indeed it is, but in your first argument you said that it would lead to families that have children with disabilities, it would lead to economic advancement for them. Well, that assumes that those families have the cash on hand to pursue the procedure, which is an erroneous assumption. Continuing on, you argue that our definition of modification is incorrect, but according to Donna Dickinson at Project Jordan, we already have techniques such as pre-implantation genetic diagnosis of embryos, which can prevent affected children from being born. That is all germline genetic editing can do. It cannot cure or save lives. We have adequately demonstrated that, I believe. And you say that we've introduced a ferry of risk. I would disagree to that as well. We should not be so naive as to think that only dangerous diseases will be targeted. Human beings are very greedy individuals. We're very greedy creatures. If we can choose to have our progeny, our children, have an advantage, if we can choose to make them more physically attractive, more intelligent, we will do that. And that will lead to certain individuals being able to have an increased leg up on the competition, which will lead to increased class divides for who knows how long. Certainly longer than it will take for the technology to catch up with cost demands. I believe you mentioned China as well. Well, the doctor who claims to have produced the genetically modified babies in China, his claims have neither been independently verified nor peer reviewed. Additionally, the hospital that he put down on his ethics paperwork deny having any part in this procedure. Furthermore, you said it's the right of the parent. Well, the parents, even if it is their right, they do not have enough information to correctly make a decision that would benefit their child. It has not been tested except on animals. And as we've mentioned before, that those test results on animals have been non-satisfactory. And if it's the right, do the parents have the right to determine the future of their child? Because that's what they are doing with this. They are, in effect, choosing how their child will live their life, what talents they will have, which will determine what careers they can pursue. I can see the rest of my time.
Cool. So you talk about the autonomy of the child and how the child gets to live its life, but this is happening so early in development the child won't even know until later on told in life. So actually we're increasing the amount of autonomy for the child in this way because we're removing these shackles of these disorders.
I disagree. I believe that you are putting increased expectations on the child because the parents, let's be honest, they're laying down some cold hard cash so that that kid comes out the way they want it to. Meaning that not only are they going to expect it to come out the way they want it to, they are going to expect it to live the way they want it to. If they genetically enhance it to where it can sing, they're going to expect it to pursue a career in singing. If they genetically enhance it to be more
Just as
intelligent,
any person has
I'm not done yet, they will
any person
expect
has
it
autonomy,
to get
they
good
can choose what
grades.
to do after they turn the age of 18 years old. They are their own adults. Once a child is not your property of the parent. That's an assumption. The child is not property of its parent. Once it hits 18, it can do whatever it wants. And you talk about destroying these communities, but it's a choice to have it done. If a parent's disabled and they want to continue that throughout their family, they can choose to do that. Just because you're rich and just because you can doesn't mean you have to do something. Also, you talk about deleting the repeats, and you're saying that may lead to extra cancers, but science has shown that it's just an ACG repeat over and over and over, and it's called expectancy. So the more it happens in families, the longer it gets, the shorter you live.
Do you not think that parents have influence over their child as they grow up?
They do.
Of course, that would lead to increased expectation. Just think when you grow up. or as you grow up, your parents constantly pressure you to get good grades or whatever their expectations may be. True, and to your point about the ACG repeats, true scientists think that, but they don't know the consequence of deleting all of those. They don't. They can't.
Studies have shown it's actually just extra DNA. It actually makes the strand particularly longer, which is actually what's the problem. And also, you talk about female versus male, but actually studies have shown that if you wanted to specifically make a male, you would have to have an XY chromosome pairing, but female is XX. So if you destroyed one of the X's, you still can't get a female out of that.
That's time. All right, third speaker.
All right, starting off, the opposing argument states how it could adamantly cause new disorders. However, it is, of course, possible that new orders can occur, but if we don't test it out, how would we know? We aren't saying that it shouldn't be regulated. We're simply saying that we should have the right to access this technology. Along with that, secondly, the opposing argument states how we cannot be naive and that we have chances of being greedy. Once again, that leads to choice. It's your choice whether or not you want to genetically modify your child. Along with that, they state about how it loses a sense of autonomy and that they have set up themselves for being going to music or going to a specific. However, if you push past that and look into the what you're modifying for the disorders. You're modifying for the better life of that. In result to that, you have a better sense of autonomy because they don't have to worry about those disorders. Oh, yeah. Along with that, they also state how the rich class division. However, prevention is a lot more effective than paying and over time with Huntington's disease, for example. If you already don't have the disease, then over time you don't have to continuously pay and try to figure out how to fix it. So you can save money over time. And along with that, we do not know the percentages that can eliminate these disorders, and we can do research that has shown that technology is very effective at eliminating these mutations. Previously mentioned, you also state how we did not have, this has not been done effectively, but recently, like you mentioned, China has recently independently verified that this was the case with the two children, the twins, who they were trying to, testing out how to get rid of AIDS, and we don't know the result yet. However, over time, with testing is that we can gain the results and see if it's effective. And you were saying how the destruction of the second X is infertile, however, it cannot be passed down from generations to generations, as far as things go. And the rejection of cancer. With those points, I would state that ultimately, having the autonomy and self-government. Ultimately, genetic engineering is a moral necessity because technology allows for reduction of human suffering. Secondly, we stated how parents should have the autonomy to self-govern and choose how their child is grown. And lastly, next we talked about human equality and egalitarianism. And lastly, we talked about economic freedom and the preventive measures of less future pays. With that closing, I would urge the judge to place a vote to the affirmative. Thank you.
So I would like to reassert that our definition of right is something that is just and proper, and we would like to reassert that parents do not have proper rights to genetically modify their children based on our definition. Now, we know from testing on animals that these animals that have had their genetics modified, although they do present some form of lack of disease, that is the goal, but they are also more likely to develop cancer later on in their life. And the potential harmful effects of these genetic modifications are completely irreversible. And we also find that these traits could be passed down to the descendants of these people who might have genetic modifications. Also, our opponents mentioned that that if there was a danger detected during the process of research, that they would back out of it. However, this is not entirely true. We know that regulation is very rarely passed when relating to life and death circumstances in these practices. We know that our government and Congress operate at a very slow rate. In addition, the Chinese professor who allegedly conducted this procedure, the first genetically modified born child, isn't it odd that the university that he belongs to is not claiming him, and they don't want anything to do with what he is saying, and they are having to do an investigation. And this was an illegal practice that he conducted. We also mentioned that with genetic modification, we would be getting rid of certain traits that by social standards we find undesirable. This includes the deaf community, even the Down syndrome community. Again, my partner has stated that these communities have developed their own sense of identity and pride and their own social circles, which is a big part of their identity. With these genetic modifications, they would perhaps cease to exist. Again, relating to the cost, the opponents mentioned that we want everyone to have an equal shot at life. However, this would be hard to understand if the families who are too poor to be able to afford this sort of procedure, what sort of equal chance would they be getting? These parents that do have access to it, it makes them exclusively financially exclusive to this practice, which would further marginalize minorities and social groups that are already being oppressed as we speak. Furthermore, with these genetic practices, or genetic modification practices, potentially, or they mention Hunter syndrome. That is something that someone is born with. However, if there is a screw up in the procedure and the child was born with some new disease, does that child have the right to sue against the procedure that was done onto him because someone actually modified his genetics? When someone is born with a disease, that is something that naturally occurs and no one would be financially responsible for. Thank you.
All right. We have 3 minutes to cross. No, 2 minutes to cross.
I have a question. Your team keeps mentioning the morality of this situation. How moral is it, however, that you would give parents the right to genetically enhance an unborn child when there are approximately 500,000 children waiting in orphanages to be adopted? And that is practically the same as building a baby. When you have 500,000 to choose from,
Well,
I'm
most
sure
of
you
the
can find
children
something
in
that meets your
orphanages
needs.
are there because they're above what is considered the desirable age, which is typically younger children. That is very unfortunate. We do agree that that is such an unfortunate situation. However, these are parents who want to go out and they want to have a child of their own. There is.
Is it even a child of their own anymore if they're changing what
It is
color
because
they
it
have?
still has the majority of their DNA.
How much? There's no limit to it. They could completely. What about
If you look at
impeachment?
the structure of DNA, most of it is actually what's called It's heterochromic. Yeah, it's called heterochromatic actually. No, it's heterochromic. Anyway, but that's actually inactive DNA, which doesn't really do much. So actually, as far as percentage, we're talking 99.99999% the same. Because things like Huntington's are only bad Huntington's is maybe 1,000 nucleotides out of over 1 billion. So you're moving maybe 1,000 out of 1 billion. So I would say if you consider, move 1,000 drops of water out of the ocean, that's still the ocean.
However,
I actually have a question for you. You say that these things are actually unaffordable, but technology becomes so much cheaper over time. That was the argument with abortion, was that only the rich would be able to access it. Abortions used to cost over $10,000. It was this thing that was so scary, but now you can go to Planned Parenthood or other places and you can get them either discounted or under $1,000.
abortion is not relevant in this conversation.
That's correct. And I would like to counter with a question of my own. You call our long-term concerns fairy effects, but then you argue that long-term the costs would decrease. How can you justify arguing that the long-term societal and health benefits are fairies, but this utopia you have imagined of people being able to genetically modify their children for the cost of a cup of coffee, I mean, really.
I'm not going to argue that it'd be the cost of a cup of coffee. I mean, well, maybe a Starbucks coffee, am I right? But no, I mean, as far as that argument goes, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, and that's the way technology has always gone. Antibiotics were expensive, abortions were expensive, every technology has been expensive when it comes out. That's because patent laws, which again, we're not arguing legality here, and that's something I wanted to bring up too, is that we're not arguing legality as far as the ability of these children to sue their parents if it's something they don't want. We're arguing the moral and ethical side of this. And I think that's what we really need to be focused on here, is whether the parent has the right morally and right.
So you just said that the best indicator of future behavior is past behavior. So you admit that. Well, past human behavior indicates that we are not trustworthy with this technology. How would you speak to that?
When you look at America's past treatment of minorities,
I
do you
agree.
think that it
America
will
has
change?
treated minorities very poorly in the past. However, we're not talking necessarily about these minorities. You can talk about the disability communities, but we're not talking about destroying those communities.
No, we're talking about those who
We're providing them
society
with the
sees as
opportunity.
superior.
And that's time. All right, last speaker, 4 minutes.
As previously discussed by the points made by my teammates, in contention number 1, we talked about genetic engineering can reduce human suffering because it will remove diseases like Huntington's. In suffering for a bunch of people that normal people that society calls normal, doesn't typically understand the issues that people with learning disabilities or diseases like Huntington's go through. Also, in contention number 2, we talked about how we deprive the parents of a sense of autonomy, and we covered that also when we were speaking. In contention number 3, by genetically engineering, we would give people with learning disabilities a more equal platform, so they would have a better foothold in the door versus when they do have a learning disability in the world now. In contention number 4, we talked about, similar to contention number 3, children born with genetic disorders start behind in life. So same with learning disabilities. People with like type 1 diabetes, they all automatically have to pay more for stuff and pay for, extra treatments. Also, and as far as our opponents state, they say that there's no test in humans that could increase the chance of cancer. These are mutually destructive terms. Not destroying the community, we would not be destroying communities, rather than we would be providing them a choice if they want to be a part of a community or not. So giving them the option to be in a community or to be not in a community. Technology becomes cheaper over time, also, as Austin kind of touched on. Abortion used to cost more than $10,000. So again, bringing up abortion, it's kind of a similar term as to what is being talked about now with genetic engineering. It's a medical technology. We're also not arguing legality as for the ability to save. So we're not talking about the legality, but we are referring to what is the moral part of this. And if the parents have the rights to. A vote for the negative would violate human rights. Genetic engineering is a choice. If you don't agree with it, you don't have to do it, point blank. But that's about it, and I think that you should vote for the affirmative.
Okay, as we discussed, according to the National Human Genome Research Institute, they refer to genome editing as only editing non-pathological traits such as eye color, height, etc. This House negates the resolution that parents should have the right to genetically enhance their children using nanotechnology, because testing these germline alterations in animals has led to the offspring being born without the original defect, but they were much more likely to experience tumor growths and cancer as their life progressed. Because of this, we believe that while genetic modification may provide some short-term cures to genetic diseases, there are much higher risks of these individuals getting cancerous tumors or even creating new and unknown diseases that we would never have fixed. For each passing generation, the risk of developing a tumor growth due to these genetic modifications is higher and higher for each child in the family bloodline. We also negate the resolution on these terms, as well as the acceptance of genetic enhancement would reintroduce class systems into today's society.
necessarily strengthen them where they already exist, such as, like we mentioned, the Down syndrome community and the deaf and signing community. They might be further marginalized and cease to exist. This procedure is also very costly, and therefore only the wealthy would be able to afford it and go through this procedure, which would further strengthen the societal beliefs that the rich are superior because they can afford the more expensive clothes, etc., which they can afford the expensive procedure, and make the poor, or the people that would not be able to afford this, even less desirable in the eyes of society. Finally, this procedure could lead to profound and severe repercussions for the children of these modifications and the overall society. And this house is not really willing to risk creating a new world of genetic diseases just because we want to choose who our children get to be.
I'm gonna give it to Steve for a minute. Y'all can make Austin.